Now, I'm coming at this from a particular perspective. It's not out of the vacuum. In particular, in the paper that I was writing, I'm writing for an audience of professional philosophers who are very interested in process philosophy, are interested in the tradition, the American tradition of William James, C.S. Peirce, Charles Hartshorne, Alfred Whitehead. And so I come at this from a particular perspective. And so where I see insights in Heidegger, it's influenced in part by that perspective. So I'll give you 3 examples of what I think still stand, irrespective of its political and its moral failure. 1, Heidegger's way of undermining the skeptical epistemological process of modern philosophy that begins with Descartes. Secondly, his phenomenological insight into the primacy of effective tone. And thirdly, taking the example from later Heidegger, the insight into the necessity for a turn to poetry if we are to live the best life and if we are to grasp adequately the meaning of being as graciousness, which is an important theme in later writing. So let me outline each one of those points. The first one, the whole problem of so-called external realism, of how we can be epistemically secure about our fundamental natural standpoint or common sense worldview, that there is an external world of entity, is bypassed in Heidegger's philosophy. The whole trajectory of argumentation begins with Descartes' radical doubt in the first meditation and winds its way through various rationalists and empiricists to Bishop Berkeley's rejection of entities independent of the preceding subject, and Hume's skepticism about causal connection is simply undermined by Heidegger's phenomenological strategy of equal time. For Heidegger, part of what it means to be human, to be there, Dasein, is to be already immersed in a practical and social understanding of the world. It's a discrimination between faculty of knowledge and understanding. We are already beings in the world before we can even ask the question of knowledge. Heidegger's insight here is that it is simply a mistake to begin by separating out an ego or cogito over and against the material world. That the ego or cogito may or may not be connected. That starting point in philosophical inquiry is just what leads to skepticism about the external world, solipsism, that one's consciousness is the only reality, and other epistemological pseudo-problems in modern philosophy. Phenomenologically, as we concretely and primordially appear, we are thrown into a world. We are immersed in a world, in a concrete situation, with a certain understanding of possibilities. In particular, Heidegger emphasizes the being of time, that among those possibilities is the possibility of our death. We are fundamentally beings toward death. This is one of the things that makes us uniquely human, gives us a unique human being. We can grasp that fundamental reality and be authentic, embrace it, and have it transform us. Or we can seek to hide it. Most of the time we're hiding from the truth about the human condition. We exist in an inauthentic state. We are fair-fallen. We are, what's in German, we are absorbed in a world of things and distracted. So the immediate understanding of the situation and its possibilities, at least to some degree, is already a kind of knowledge. It is a pragmatic knowledge, largely of how to, that precedes any theoretical or scientific knowledge of the things of the environment or the needs of it. The quest for connection between Dasein and its world cannot then arise in Heidegger's philosophy. With this move, the same pragmatic understanding as preceding theoretical proposition, Heidegger then subverts the Cartesian project that's carried on from Descartes all the way through his own teacher, Edmund Husserl, in such works as Husserl's Cartesian meditation. Now, the second insight. Heidegger's reform of Husserl gets at some of the significant main points in a so-called effective theory of sensation and perception, which, by the way, has been roughly confirmed in experimental psychology. Now, this is the idea that you don't have separate modal faculties of the senses. So seeing is absolutely separate from tactility, is absolutely separate from other kinds of sensory modes. It's the notion that emotional tone is part and parcel of a sense experience. So that, for example, the gaiety of yellow, or the cheerfulness of yellow, is part and parcel of the experience of yellow. It can't be abstracted from it. Or the warmth of red that poets will often, for example, is something that is part and parcel of the experience of that. Or pain in the sensation of intense heat. And these were positions that Charles Hartshorne, for example, argues for in his first great book, The Philosophy and Psychology of Sensation. And Heidegger influenced him and pushed him in this direction, as did a German psychologist named Julius Pickler. So sometimes in experimental psychology, this intersensory and affective theory of sensation is referred to as the Hartshorne-Pickler hypothesis. The consciousness of design is precisely not to be characterized by mere registration of data, as if we have this sort of lock-in blank slate and we have these imprints of sensory data. What Heidegger derogates is purest content. Mere primary and secondary qualia to which affective tones are then superadded or associated. But rather, it is to be characterized by Heidegger's explicit emphasis on the essential role of affective sensitivity and emotional tone, what he calls in German, a binding kind of stimulus, as the conditions of our being aware of phenomena at all. So, Charles Hartshorne, for example, in his early review, praises Heidegger for such a case. However, in a later essay on Heidegger, Hartshorne revises his judgment by holding that while Heidegger indeed improved upon Husserl by stressing the practical and subjectively emotional aspects of experience, the Heidegger of Sein und Zeit did not go far enough with respect to the aesthetic aspects of experience. What Hartshorne means is that Sein und Zeit never achieved the phenomenological insight of Whitehead, that experience of always involves the experience of an immediate aesthetic content of the body. Every human experience is an experience of experience. That is to say, our sharing in the enjoyments on the cellular level. Hartshorne's critique is precisely in accord, I should point out, with that of Hans Jonas, who argues that the central philosophical inadequacy of Sein und Zeit is, in fact, interesting to comment on his points about Descartes, is his tacit allowance of the Cartesian Newtonian matter underneath the phenomenological analysis. In effect, the other beings in the world outside Dasein are spiritually denuded at the hands of physical science in sort of Heidegger's view in being and mind. In fact, they have no meaningful existence. They are sin-loss, as he puts it, or meaningless, and come into existence only insofar as they engage with Dasein. Notwithstanding, Hartshorne alludes to Heidegger's shift to poetry and his intense interest in the German poet Goethe as, quote, eventually bringing Heidegger closer to the idea that I had. Indeed, this anti-anthropocentric later Heidegger, inspired by a poetics of nature, is the Heidegger who has influenced deep ecologists. And for development in this theme, I point you to suggest readings to Michael Zimmerman, his work on Heidegger, Buddhism, and deep ecology. Michael Zimmerman, who chairs philosophy at Tulane, is probably the leading sort of neo-Heideggerian, leading neo-Heideggerian Now, I'm going to skip a portion of the paper in the interest of time, in which I deal in criticisms of Heidegger for being against the discipline of logic, especially the later Heidegger, his anti-conceptualism. And I point out that there are a lot of misunderstandings about Heidegger here. Heidegger says very clearly in his Einführung in die Metaphysik, in the introduction to metaphysics, that he is not attacking logic as the science of thinking straight, but rather he's attacking logical reductionism, a kind of an attitude about logic in which logic is a science which represses thought and which keeps us from asking certain questions. So Heidegger can't be decontextualized here, because I think many of his main critics, such as Rudolf Carnap didn't get at all what Heidegger was talking about. Or Marjorie Brand, who thinks he's done a lot of sophisticated shifting in his uses of the wording non-being and nothingness. The point of my paper at Western Carolina, my contribution to textual scholarship, was actually that Heidegger is actually consistent in his uses of the expressions nothingness and non-being. And he doesn't have in mind what the Greeks describe as nothingness, as upon, as absolute emptiness with no reference whatsoever. That cannot be what Heidegger means. And if you think that's what he means, of course you're going to accuse him of being illogical or proposing propositions that have no reference to the logical substance of the proposition. So instead, I move to the point, the insight about his poetic. The process thinker Schubert Ogden has suggested that there are problems with clarity and communicability in Heidegger, but they're not to be addressed in Heidegger Sein, but rather to the later Heidegger. However, many Heidegger scholars resist this reading. Their argument is that Heidegger was always intensely concerned with his own standards of precision of statement, internal logic, and philosophical justification. The difference here, however, in the case of the later Heidegger, is that the language of poetry becomes such a pronounced feature of his thinking. And poetry, by its very nature, calls up the issue of the amplitude of interpretation, as every student does who tries to interpret a piece of poetry. However, there is an argument for the deliberate predominance of poetics in Heidegger, in the later Heidegger. And it is intrinsically connected with this aesthetic term, the very term to which Hartshorne himself has suggested earlier. The argument is that poets are necessary. They are necessary because poets allow us to let things be. This is a central motif in later Heidegger, the notion of the ubiquitous within, in which one allows things to be. What Heidegger describes as the ubiquitous is evoked by poetry, and conversely, being grasped as Sein in the evocation of poetry. For Heidegger, this is especially true through the poets of the night, such as Holden, where they take us into very dark and mysterious places in which we then become transformed by this depth of darkness. Poetry is necessary because such profound human experiences, as to use Heidegger's examples, as the experience of the wholeness, of graciousness, of mysterious and dark forests, of sacred places, Greek temples, etc., etc. They are not said or thought adequately, or even appropriately with propositional language, and certainly not with the language of discursive argument. But let me give you a concrete example taken from my own experience, and I sort of get an opinion that Heidegger is really honest. The experience I had with my daughter several years ago was we stood holding hands on the legendary Rialto Bridge of Venice on a glorious